Today's topic here, complexities in terrorism. All I'm going to try to do is look at the term terrorism and how it has complex definition, meaning, and so on. So the first thing you probably want to do is define terrorism in your own words, see what you think counts, possibly what does not count. These are things you want to consider. Maybe you want to create a T-chart to see what counts, and like I said, what does not count. Going to give you a couple of other examples. State-sponsored or ordered by the government. Do you have to have people acting, as not members of the government commit an act of terrorism? Is it any different if the state or the government itself commits an act of terrorism? Let's use the example of Hiroshima. If we take the definition of terrorism, let's take a look at this FBI definition here. Intimidate or coerce a civilian population. Think about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Did that possibly happen? Maybe. Was it designed to influence the policy of the government by intimidation or coercion? I guess if you're trying to get Japan to surrender. To affect the conduct of the government by mass destruction, by dropping 2 nuclear bombs. Does Hiroshima count? I don't know. That's debatable. Clearly, you could see that this is taking place during war. So does war trump terrorism? I do not know. However, that is the point of this screencast, just to look at the complexities of the term terrorism. Anyway, what about these issues? Killing one person for a state political cause or killing 100 people? Does it matter if there is a clear political cause, or really are we concerned about the bodies, the amount of destruction and loss of life there? What about if the group is an online hacker group like Anonymous that simply shuts down sites, releases data? Is that terrorism? Or do we have to have people, loss of life? These are questions with regard to terrorism. Domestic and international terrorism, keep in mind there is a difference. International terrorism is linked to an international global network, whereas domestic terrorism can take place within the borders. So if we look at the Pulse nightclub shooting, that individual, if he is not linked to ISIS, that would free this individual up of being held accountable for international terrorism. If this individual, let's take the San Ysidro massacre at McDonald's, that individual did not seem to have any policy, government, change. So that would not count as an act of terrorism. However, domestic terrorism, I don't know, I guess if you can find some sort of link to some sort of political agenda, that would count. However, he's an individual doing this killing in the United States, so more along the lines of domestic terrorism happening within the borders of the country. Keep in mind the UN has a definition, and these terms, these definitions, they change. Consideration political, philosophical, ideological, racial, provoke a state of terror. So if you're just creating a state of terror, does that count? These are all things that make the term to be complicated. So in class, all I really would like you to do is just, take a look at the scenario and put, yes, this is an example of terrorism, or no. We'll first start off with John Brown. If you're not familiar with John Brown, he was an abolitionist, which means he is trying to end slavery. That is his goal. He seizes Harper Ferry, 4 people are killed, wounding 9. So if we apply the definition here, domestic terrorism, he's trying to intimidate or coerce the civilian population, and he's trying to influence the policy of the government. However, since this individual is trying to end slavery, do we give him a pass simply because he is advocating for the abolitionist cause? I don't know. That is a gray area, something for you to figure out. Here's what John Brown said on trial with regard to his act of terrorism, or fight for freedom and justice. As he mentions here, he is trying to, end injustice in the United States by ending slavery. Let's look at a couple of other examples. What about the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, terrorist organization, the Black Hand, angry at the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and attempting to eliminate their government by assassinating the heir to the Austrian throne. I guess that counts as an act of terrorism, because keep in mind, this individual is trying to influence the policy of the government, which would be a standing up against the Austro-Hungarian imperialism in the region. Let's look at some other examples. What about the Nazi reign of terror? What if you're Jewish living in the Third Reich? The government is definitely terrorizing its civilians. However, those citizens live within the state, so it brings up the question of whether or not government can commit terrorism, or is this just simply something that is only going to be committed by groups of people with a political agenda. Let's take a look at this example, the 16th Street Baptist Church. These individuals are trying to maintain segregation. The group is the Klan, and they're protesting any of the civil rights, success, at the hands of the SCLC, which was Dr. King's organization. So the question here is whether or not this is an example of terrorism, seem to have a political agenda, and they are trying to influence the government. If we go back to the definition here, domestic terrorism, intimidate, coerce. Like if I was African American, I would be terrified of the Klan. They're trying to influence the policy of the government, so they would be guilty there. Affect the government, conduct of the government. Again, the Klan would be guilty for terrorism. This one's a little more controversial. What about the Sons of Liberty? Those individuals that were tarring and feathering loyalists, people that were supportive of the British government and the crown, or do they get a pass simply because these are the 13 colonists and these were the individuals who were eventually going to be the founding fathers of the United States? Do they get a pass because we agree with their agenda? Yes or no, that is for you to determine. What about Eric Robert Rudolph? This individual is an anti-abortionist, somebody upset about gay rights in America in the 90s, was responsible for the Olympic Park bombing. Individual, doesn't seem to have any manifesto that's developed. So does this count as an act of terrorism? Do you always need some sort of manifesto? I guess that is the debatable question here. Let's take, for example, Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. Ted Kaczynski wrote this piece here, Industrial Society and Its Future, and he mailed a series of bombs to political figures, reporters, people in position of power, and he wrote this piece here, which targeted technology and saying that the Industrial Revolution and technological advancements were going to be the end of the human race. And so Ted Kaczynski was going to, commit acts of terrorism as a lone wolf, which means he was somebody acting on his own. That's pretty much it. Keep in mind, all I'm trying to do here is just to get you to think about the definition of terrorism, global terrorism or international terrorism in comparison to domestic terrorism, seeing what counts and what does not count. So you possibly might want to go back to your T-chart or your definition of terrorism and see what counts and what does not count.